I'd like to introduce to you our next guest, who is Julian Wragg. Julian is an independent sales and business advisor and also a coach and mentor in that space. It's really great to have you on. Very exciting for me because this episode is an opportunity for us to talk about sales and marketing, very much in the space of startups and subject matter and small and medium enterprises. Sorry, not subject matter experts, which I have in my head for my regulatory compliance sort of work. But I think it's really interesting. I've been very excited for this one as well, Julian, because also there's a good hook into, and we were discussing before we sort of hit record around sort of like, the whole aspect of the buyers as well. So we can, and I can bring in that whole piece around health organisations and some of those attitudes and everything. So we'll kick off, Julian, with as we always do on the Only Way is Ethics, is you just tell us a bit about your background, how you got into sales, and then we'll crack on with some discussion.
Great, thanks, Dean. And it's a privilege to be on to be invited onto the podcast as well. So thank you very much in advance for that.
Pleasure.
So just I think I had an ordinary childhood. Grew up in Nottinghamshire from the age of about 8 or 9 years old. My father moved around with his business 5 times. We lived in everywhere: the Isle of Wight, Cheltenham. Born in Bristol. We moved everywhere, but we settled Nottinghamshire. My parents were worried that my accent would go from being Bath and Path to Bath and Path. It's now Bath and Path, so there we go. But yeah, I was lucky. I went to a good local grammar school, small grammar school. Some great friends, had great schooling. Came down to London, the big city, to study. Chose South Bank Polytechnic as it was, the University of the South Bank as it is now, but I chose it for 2 reasons. It had a very good rugby team, number 1, and a very good business course, number 2, and that was my priority. Rugby was my life at that time, and just stayed in London and the South East since. So that's my background.
No, that's great. So as part of that, so sort of down to London, the big smoke, and sort of like around there. And so how did you get into sales in relation to and sort of like where you are now? Because obviously we've spoken before, and sort of you've had like lots of experience within different sectors. As well, and now sort of like using that experience to coach and mentor people, which is absolutely key, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think I fell into it by accident. I mean, at South Bank, I studied business with specialization in marketing and finance. Went off to the States. I worked in a summer camp. I hitchhiked with a friend from East Coast to West Coast. We did a lot of stuff in the US, and I came back and wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. And then I heard that one of my ex rugby playing friends had got a job, but not only a job, but he got a car with it as well. And I'm like, oh, and he got a job in sales. I thought, flipping heck, if he can do that and get a car. So I went out and I was very lucky, found a job, new sales team. And I'm going to impress you for a second here, Dean, so prepare yourself for this. But my first company car was a Ford Fiesta 1.1. There we go. And it had the company name on the side. It was hilarious.
Really? Nice.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good grounding in sales. I learned how to sell in that, and it was knocking on doors, a lot of it. It was selling a builder's product into architects and builders merchants. So it's a good grounding, but I only stayed 6 months. And I think my first proper sales role, if you like, was with the financial services company Dun & Bradstreet, who are known for its financial information.
Well. Yeah,
Do you?
Absolutely. Well, we have to sort of like, when we go for tenders, etc. and stuff like that. Yeah. You need your Dun & Bradstreet number, etc. So yeah.
So I spent a really good couple of years there. And if I'll tell you why I left maybe later on if it comes up. Yeah, I think that was my first job where I really cut my teeth. I remember getting my first contract, and the contract was for something like £337. And I got back in my car and I did the old Del Boy thing, you know.
Yeah.
Then I knew I could do it. I knew
Yeah.
I could do it, and it sort of just helped my confidence in knowing that I could do it.
And you've just spoken about confidence in relation to that, because as we know, that, you know, I work in digital health, and that whole, I'm a founder myself, and you know, we've spoke about this previously as well. Sales isn't for everybody, and interestingly, I said I'm not a salesperson. But then we come to the sort of, like, you know, the big realization that, you know, small organization, I don't have a sales team, therefore I am a salesperson in relation to that. But it's, from my experience, Julian, it's really difficult, and it's not something, if it's not something that you've been trained in. You haven't gone to college to do sort of, like, you know, sales and marketing degrees or courses, etc. And potentially you're not that way inclined. It depends on your personality, doesn't it? It's not going to come as second nature, is it to people? So,
no,
you know, and you've obviously had sort of, like, you know, influences and sort of, like, you know, advice and guidance within your time, and sort of, so tell us a bit about sort of, like, some of that.
Yeah, you've raised a really good point there. So the first thing is that everybody sells. If you work for an organization, everybody sells. You could be at a party, you could be around your neighbors, and you get the age-old question, so what do you do for a living? You're selling either your company, you know, I work for such and such a company. Oh, what do they do? What do you do for them? You actually are promoting your business. So, you know, we are all selling. And you're right, confidence does come into it. I mean, for salespeople, you take more no's than yeses. And there's an old adage that the more no's that you take, the closer you are to the yes. And not, depending on what kind of business you're in, it's often a numbers game. But I look at startups and SMEs, and I've worked with quite a number of these, and where the founders don't have sales experience necessarily, and their first few sales are with people they know. It's their network. It's the people that are friends, family, business contacts from before. And not saying those are easy sales. That no sales are easy, but they are easier because they know you, they trust you, they know who you are, and you can do those. And that often gives those founders a false confidence. Oh, if it's this easy, everybody else will do it. And then I've seen this actually happen many times. You exhaust that list of your circle of contacts, and then the crunch starts. You have to go out and find, you know, cold prospects that don't know you, that don't know your business. And that's where the hard work really starts. And that's when you really know if you've got a viable business or not, whether it's gonna fly. And that's where the importance of marketing comes in, and a host of other factors. But certainly confidence, you know, I've worked for a lot of American companies, and Americans have that unique ability to really talk up themselves and their products. For us Brits, you know, we tend to sort of talk down ourselves and on our companies and our products. And, you know, we've got to find a happy medium, a happy balance in there somewhere. But yeah, where everybody sells. I remember doing a video course years and years and years ago, and it was done by sort of people like John Cleese were in it, and they had an example of a company selling, what were they selling? Hoovers, vacuum cleaners.
Right.
And the salesperson sells it, and then the engineer goes into the house because there's something wrong with the Hoover. I shouldn't say Hoover. It was, but the engineer goes in, And he goes like this. He goes, "Ooh, who sold you this then?" "Well, it was Dean Mawson." "Ooh, oh, no. I wouldn't have sold you this one." "Why? What's wrong with it?" And the fact is that this engineer, and it was showing as an example how the engineer created doubt. And then it shows the van that belongs to the company cutting up people, and the driver swearing at other drivers, and it was pointing out that everybody sells. Everybody sells.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you're absolutely right, and it's really sort of being cognizant of like who is the face of your organisation in relation to that, and I think a lot of people don't realise that. The example you've just given is that wherever you are, people are potentially going to associate you with your organisation, so you need to act accordingly in relation to that, and probably something that's not sort of looked upon. I mean, you know, my background, I'm a clinician, you know, in relation to that. I'm not a businessman, but you then become sort of like, you know, a bit more aware, and you grow skills that you didn't realise you sort of like, you know, you had in relation to that. And I think it's really important. So from your perspective, Julian, in relation to that, like you're absolutely right. I mean, sales and marketing is absolutely key, especially for startups and SMEs as well, in relation to, especially in the space that I'm in. It's a tough market at the moment. You know, within the NHS, you know, it's not say there's not a lot of money around, but sort of like, you know, there is sort of like, with everything that's going on and all the changes that are coming around, it's just made it a lot harder in relation to that. Therefore, you know, sales and marketing is absolutely key, isn't it, to putting your story forward. So how has that sort of changed, sort of like, you know, during your career? Sort of like, you know, have you found it's become harder? Have we had sort of peaks and troughs in relation to sort of like, you know, being able to sort of like, you know, the markets? Because I suppose it is market dependent, isn't it?
To an extent, yes. I mean, if you're selling into businesses, the principles are pretty much the same across the board. You know, when I first started in sales, this was pre-internet days. Can you imagine? You know, I'd be sat at my desk and I'd be phoning up people, phoning into banks, big companies, small companies. And I was from a sales perspective, I had the knowledge to share, because the buyer didn't know anything about me or my business. So all I had to do was say, "Look, are you interested in knowing more about this?" And I would get the meeting. And in a sense, as a salesperson, I was in control, and the buyer was not in control to an extent. And that's not a negative. That's just how it was. And buyers would be like, "Yeah, come in. I'd love to hear more about that." And then you'd go in and have a good chat. And if they were interested in taking it further, you know, the better. But that's all changed. You know, the internet came in late 90s. You know, with that, you've got e-commerce, you've got social media, you've got mobile technology. And if you fast forward to now, most of the buying decision is made before the buyer engages with the vendor. Think about it.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. I mean, think about the last time you made a purchase, a hefty purchase at home, like a washing machine or a new TV. What do you do? What do you do first? You don't just wander into a shop and go, "Hey, I'm interested in a washing machine. What have you got?" We bought a new car 4 years ago. We bought a Tesla, and I researched everything online before. And then we called up a couple of companies and like, "We want to do a test drive." We didn't need to be sold to. I knew all the facts. I'd made my buying decision to an extent. And buyers today are no different. They're no different. They don't want to engage with a salesperson or a vendor until they absolutely have to. So, 25, 30 years ago, the salesperson was the font of all knowledge. They were able to share their knowledge, their expertise with the buyer, but no longer. So, what today's salespeople need to do is to build that relationship quickly, and gain that trust with the buyer, but help them through the buying process, which is more about what the salesperson is about now, helping them navigate that buying process. What we've got to remember as well, different surveys say different things, but they estimate that in an average B2B buying cycle, there could be up to 12 stakeholders on the buying side. So we're no longer selling to one person. There's a group. And if you can imagine a group of 12 people, where at one end you've got somebody who's super enthusiastic, and at the other end somebody who's not enthusiastic at all, and everybody else in between, different backgrounds, different thoughts and processes, different needs. And the salesperson needs to sort of try and bring those people together and gain a consensus. And that's what's hard today, bringing that group together.
And you're absolutely right. And I think from my experiences and looking at this from sort of like a digital health perspective, as sort of like some of the audience will know, I worked for an EPR supplier for 11 years, and I worked very closely with the sales team, sales and marketing team. And you're right. You've got, when you're out there and you're buyers, I've got all different sort of personalities, egos, especially within healthcare.
Yeah,
it's a very you could have you've got a group of you're doing demonstrations to small numbers of people, large numbers of people. It can be very varied, and all of a sudden you've got a little cohort of clinicians that are just going to make your life hell during that sort of like demonstration. And as a salesperson, you've got to be really thick-skinned, haven't you? And you've got to be able to navigate these sort of like some really difficult challenges in relation to that.
No doubt. But I think the key thing from the sales side is asking the right questions. And I've learned that there's no harm in being very open. Like, we think our product is a good fit, but I've actually told people before, our product is not a good fit for what you're seeking, because I'd rather them know early than me waste their time trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. It just doesn't work. But conversely as well, I ask them, is this something that you could use? Is it going to deliver value? Do you have the budget for it? Let's just, am I wasting my time or not? And sometimes it gets to the point where I actually have to say that. I don't feel we're actually going anywhere with this, and that's fine. Timing might not be right, budget might not be right. There may be so many different factors, but being able to have that open, honest conversation with the buyer to know where you stand is super important. And as a salesperson, I appreciate it when buyers are super transparent with me, and I behave the same with them as well. I don't want to waste my time, and they don't want to waste their time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you mentioned it previously. I think that whole, and this is something that I've become to sort of like realise as sort of like being the founder of your own organisation, and the importance of relationships and building those relationships. And sometimes it's a it's a hard slog, and you have to persevere. You have to. It's not just a sort of like you said. Once you've exhausted your network, sometimes. And don't get me wrong. It's always that your network is absolutely key to the success of your organisation in some respect, because you'll always have that to lean on. However, when you're going out and doing sort of like that whole concept of sort of like cold calling, as it were, is quite alien to me. And sort of like, you know, when you're there and you're sort of, I think when you have an expectation of, oh, everything's going to come in to me, everything's inbound in relation to sort of like inquiries of, and you're like, of course that's how it works, and sort of like, you know, that's how it is. So everybody knows who I am, everyone knows our services, everyone knows what we do. Therefore, everything's there's just going to be this wave of sort of like stuff that comes in, and then when you're sat there and you're like, this isn't how it's sort of like, you know, my perceptions are a bit wrong in relation to that.
The key here, Dean, is about being buyer centric. And that means putting yourself in the shoes of the buyer, not looking at it from your sales perspective. So what I've always done throughout my career is put myself in their shoes. What are they thinking? What are they looking for? What's important to them? And I ask these questions. You know, why not? What's important to you? What are you looking for? What problems are you looking to solve? You know, what kind of budget do you have? You know, and I ask all these questions. And what a lot of companies forget, you know, I've dealt with a number of companies and say, oh, we need a good sales leader to bring on sales. And I'm like, well, what are you doing about marketing? Well, you know, we've got a website. And what people forget is that the importance of marketing. Marketing comes first. Marketing creates demand. The salesperson's job is to take that demand and convert it into sales. And given what I said earlier about how buyers are using all their resources, AI, and all the web resources to do their research before they engage with you, that marketing becomes super important. You know, to be across social networks, to be across LinkedIn, to make sure that when people do search, that you're popping up as the main one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does, absolutely. And I'll sort of like to reiterate that as well, especially within sort of like the digital health market, and for the audience out there, just to sort of like, you know, advice and guidance. So obviously we work in a regulatory compliance space. Yeah. And it's all around sort of, you know, compliance with a number of different sort of like regulations and standards. And I'm all about, when I go to look at some of my clients' websites and I say to them, I've looked at your homepage and you don't surface any of your compliance sort of like anywhere. And wow. they're like, oh no, yeah, we don't have. And I'm like, why? You should be singing it from the rooftops. You should be, that's what's putting you above the next person that's not doing it or aren't compliant in relation to that. And within our space, that's going to be the factor that's potentially going to win you business or lose you business in relation to that. And it's really important.
Totally. That's the difference between a transactional sale and becoming more of a strategic advisor. You know, it's more less of being a vendor and more of being a strategic support to the customer. And putting yourself in the buyer's shoes again. What does the buyer want to see when they go to your website? What do they want to know? I'll give you a real example. Over the weekend, I got a text message from Vodafone saying, good news, this so-and-so product has been launched. You know, it's now available. And they didn't say what it was. And I actually followed the link. It was actually a new phone for teenagers, as it happened. But they didn't say it was a mobile phone. I just thought it was a piece of software. They didn't say what it was, which is, mind you, maybe it was a clever trick of making me go to the website because that worked. But just thought I've just missed. You know, if they'd said what it was right up front, I might have been more interested. But there we go. But yeah, that's the biggest miss.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I used to always, when I worked at IMS, was to say to the sort of like the sales team and the marketing guys, is that sort of, you know, so we train clinical safety officers and we do clinical risk management awareness sort of like courses, etc. as well. And I used to, like, when I organised these, when I worked for sort of like the organisation, I'd invited along the sales and marketing guys, and they were like, no, we don't need to be on this. And I'm like, no, you totally do. This is everybody's responsibility and everyone needs to know. because you're going to go out there,
yeah,
and you're going to be asked these questions in relation to that. And if you don't know, then potentially they just move on to the next organisation. They're not even going to take you any further in relation to that. And this is the realization, is that sort of like, you need to know your market, don't you? And you need to know the sort of ins and outs of everything in relation to what the art is.
And the fact that every buyer is different. Every buyer has different
absolutely
influences, different needs. You don't know what they're looking at, and they're not just going to buy from you because you've got a nice smile and a nice personality. That's the
no, absolutely. So interestingly, coming on to sort of like, you mentioned sort of like, the internet, artificial intelligence, huge in our sector at the moment, well, in relation to sort of like everything we do.
Yeah.
But obviously it comes with risk as well, as I know, first and foremost, being sort of like doing risk assessment, etc. So, but I can see with sort of like, and I think you mentioned before as well, Julian, sort of number crunching sometimes, and stats, etc., are really important. So I can imagine AI can be a real help in relation to that. But then also, we're now in the sort of like realm of sort of like lots of tender responses, etc., and stuff like that. And people are just potentially out there saying, "Oh, I'll just push a button and let AI do it," in relation to, and all of a sudden you've got this response that you don't even know, sort of like, unless obviously you've got, everyone should be sort of like vetting this, but people can get lazy in relation to AI, and we've seen that happen.
Yeah, I've seen that happen a lot. I was there, as mentioned earlier, when the internet happened, and I think the AI thing is equally as transformational as the internet was. I worked for a company called Smartforce. It launched an e-learning platform in the late 80s. The share price dropped simply because people didn't understand what it was, and it soon came back up when people did realize what it could do. And AI has a long way to go. We've got to think, where's AI going to be in 6 months, a year, 2 years time? And yes, there's a lot of bias on there. There's a lot of hallucinationary stuff. That's a new word I've just made up. So we've got to learn how to use it. It's a tool. I'm seeing a lot of the younger generation using it, for 90% of their work. I received an email from somebody, an ex-colleague, and it was clearly written by AI, because I know this particular person. I know how much he's using AI, and it just seemed disingenuous. It didn't seem authentic. So it's how we use it. I use it before meetings to ask, what's going on in this company right now. If I'm going for a meeting, what are the key factors driving business right now? Has anything new happened recently? And then I ask about the individual as well that I'm meeting with, and get some background. And that's just from my own personal research. What sort of things are they going to be motivated by? What's the key factors that's driving their business right now? So I use AI for a lot of research, but the number crunching, using it for data, is critical, particularly when you could waste time in business. You could spend hours going after a particular company, a potential buyer, and not get the sale. So it's about defining what your market is, the ICP, the ideal customer profile. And again, I help a lot of early start businesses define their ICP. Super critical. What is your ideal customer profile? And the companies that succeed are the ones that can focus on a very, very narrow focus, instead of going all out for everyone. And the best example of that is Nike. When Nike first came out, they worked hard to dominate the athletic shoe market. Their competitors, Adidas and others, went after every market. So Nike became number one in the athletic shoe market, and then they went after basketball or tennis, whatever it was.
The rest.
But they went to dominate each one with that singular focus, laser focus. So, you know, when I'm advising companies, I talk about the ICP, about keeping it super narrow. This is our focus. This is what we focus on as a business. But yes, AI is changing business, every business, and it's how we use it, how we utilize it, that's going to be the deciding factor. Without doubt.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's using it, like you said. I think it's using it, utilizing it in the right way.
Yes.
But unfortunately, I think we have a tendency, don't we? We're human beings, and we're sort of like, you know, there's a lot of us that sort of tend to like sort of look at it as, oh, I can cut corners if I do this, or it's gonna save me time with sort of activities that actually you need to be sort of like, you know, paying attention to. But like you said, it's prioritizing, isn't it? And it's using its capabilities to support your organization and not to take over in relation to some of those. So,
and interestingly, Dean, if I just mention, in one of the last companies I was working with, you know, emailing and phoning wasn't really working. What was working were face-to-face contacts. In other words, showing up at a conference, or an exhibition, and having that face-to-face time, even just for 2 minutes. And we found, you know, the majority of sales were coming from people we'd met in person. So we started doing more breakfasts and dinners and inviting people, and that was working incredibly well. I think there's a little bit of a kickback. You know, I like you, I get tons of AI-driven sales messages every day, most of which I ignore. But the face-to-face contact, I meet somebody. Hey, I met you and Sonia at the Grafted event. And so it just goes to show where you're going to meet.
I couldn't agree with you more, Julian. And you know, don't get me wrong. There's a place for sort of obviously communicating with email, sort of like, and you know, whether it's over like Teams or whatever sort of like channels you're using, but it's absolutely key that you do that face to face. And for, you know, for the audience out there, if you are sort of, you know, and I know it's difficult sometimes, isn't it? Because lots of people don't have the capacity, or if you look at some of these conferences, they're not cheap to sort of to go through. But I would say to the audience, if you have the opportunity, if you are invited to, or you know, in any way or within your network, you can get sort of invited onto conferences, you can get invited into forums, etc. That it's absolute gold dust. For instance, I went to Rewired, which is one of the big digital health conferences. We were there. I walked in the front, and my plan was to get to the back to meet a colleague, and I'd said to him, I've just arrived, I'm just coming now to meet you. It took me 2 hours to get to that colleague, and that just shows sort of like, you know, and the good thing is, and again, I'd advise people that are going to conferences, don't downplay if you have been invited, and then you're getting some of the lead up emails that say to you, can you tell us a bit about your services, and can you tell us about, and do you want to use the networking options? Absolutely do use those sort of networking options, because again, you'll meet people, because I hear some people and they say, oh no, I don't use that, never comes to anything in relation to that. But it'll be that one opportunity, won't it? It'll be that one conversation. And I've had it many times. I've been going to the conferences now since 2006. I've been going to the healthcare conferences, and I'll never miss a year of taking the opportunity. Because you will always find, even if you just come away and you've grown your network by 1% or a small percentage, that means something in relation to your organisation.
It's getting out there and meeting people. You can't dodge that. Business is about people. You've got to get out and meet people. And if you can't afford to go to some of these expensive conferences, you know, organizing a breakfast and inviting a few customers, inviting a few prospects, getting somebody to speak, people love that kind of thing. Just to meet and sit around a table and chat, you know, that's a really good way of driving business. People like that for the cost of a breakfast or a lunch.
Yeah, or even now, look, you know, utilizing sort of like social media and the platforms that we do have, sort of organizing webinars or sort of like, because we are, you know, those people that are SMEs within their area, or they want to sort of like, you know, give a free webinar in relation to showcasing their product, or demonstrating a case study in relation to that. It's all going to sort of like add up.
There's no one answer to this.
No,
it's a question of trying them all and doing them all to some extent. But you know, I think it's interesting to see there is a tendency to going back to that kind of face-to-face, let's meet in person kind of contact, which I think a lot of salespeople, it's told me young salespeople through COVID got used to all the Zoom calls, and you know, I was brought up to go face to face. You know, you had face to face meetings all week, which you know, that habit dies hard.
Yeah, you can't take the personability in relation to what we're doing is absolutely key, and you should never lose that in whatever we're doing. So, Julian, your role as a coach and a mentor. So obviously that's something that you do now. So in relation to that and in support of sort of organisations, so what's your focus in relation to that role?
Yeah, you know, I've fallen into coaching and mentoring. It was something that was part of my role as a sales leader in all my jobs. Excuse me. That I've been advising a number of CEOs of startups and SMEs, and sales leaders as well. And you know, as a salesperson myself, I know what it takes to be good in sales. And you touched upon it earlier. Confidence is a big deal. I was coaching a sales lead, and she was quite open that she just lacked confidence. So I just spent a lot of time with her, building her confidence. She had the ability, she just didn't know how to apply it. One of the biggest influences on my life, I did a Dale Carnegie course. It was a public speaking and human relations course, because I was a great public speaker as long as there's no more than 3 people in the room. And I went from, I think, I can't remember, it's like a 12-week course, one evening a week for 12 weeks. But by the end of it, I was very comfortable speaking in front of hundreds, if not thousands of people. It just something I'd never been taught before. And I think confidence is something you can learn. It's just like anything, it's practice. It's about expanding your zone of comfort, your comfort zone. And that goes with a lot of leaders as well. Some of the best salespeople I've worked with, and Marnie Threppleton, love that name. She has that ability to ask the next question, and she always talked about Columbo. Do you remember Columbo, the detective series? It's showing my age here. But at the end, he'd go, just one more thing, just one more thing. And I think too many salespeople and people who are in a position of sales, like yourself, that you're not a salesperson but you're selling, often don't ask that final question. Just one more thing. And I think the best people in business are those people that can do that. And I think that's a really important quality. So you need a bit of confidence, but you need a bit of inquisitiveness as well, curiosity, you know, to ask the right things.
Yeah, no, and I think that it does come with experience, and the whole confidence piece. It's really interesting because we're both mentors, So, we mentor I mentor clinical safety officers, and it's really interesting when you get sort of junior clinical safety officers and they come to you and it's like, just not confident in, and with them it's in relation to sort of like challenging, because they're looking at sort of like, there's really sometimes really senior people that they're in front of, and they just don't have there's this peer sort of like thing that they just can't get their heads round. And when we sort of go through the program and they start being competent in relation to what they're doing, they have more knowledge and more experience, then the confidence starts to grow, and they're more confident to challenge, etc. in relation to that. And it's really nice actually when you see that happen and you see that sort of grow over a period of time. Totally. And then that whole confidence comes out. But then you get other people that are just sort of like, they want it now, and they're very impatient, and they're like, make me confident. That's what you've been that's what you've been brought in to do. So make us confident. And I'm like, well, hang on, let's go through the steps.
It's so funny. I learned an early lesson in life. My boss's boss was a guy called Andrew Brody, and I worshipped this guy. But could I talk to him? Absolutely not. And it came back to me that he perceived me as being arrogant. Okay. And it wasn't. I was just in awe of him. And I didn't have the confidence to face him or speak to him. Right. And I learned a lot from that. I thought, okay, need to change that, because that can't happen. And the Americans have got a lovely phrase, fake it until you make it. Pretend you're confident until you are. And, there's plenty of, I've heard so many people say things like CEOs and people with big titles, they're the same as you and me. They use, I'm not going to get crude on this, but they use the bathroom. Do you know what I mean? They have their own insecurities. And, something that I learned from my time at Pluralsight, everybody that you'd speak with has something crap going on in their lives. That everybody's dealing with something in their life. Don't care who you are dealing with something. And when I meet somebody, I'm always a bit sort of more, not cautious, but just sensitive to the fact that they might have something else going on, because they do. You've got something. I'm not going to ask you, Dean, but you've got something going on. I've got something in my life that I could do without now. Do you know what I mean? But you deal with it. But it gives me a sort of ability to sort of be a bit more patient with people, knowing that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think what it's done for me as well, because we always strike a chord on the podcast when sort of like conversations happen. And this is why I love it, because it's that whole informal sort of like space. And I think what I've found in relation to that, it's made me a bit more, when I'm dealing with people, it's made me more confident, because it's made me a bit more relaxed in relation to, I've been through all of this, so why should I worry about what's coming, or I'm in front of a room full of 100 or however many people.
Exactly.
I've got to the point, Julian, that I'm just like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm very comfortable with that, and it doesn't really faze me. I think, from when we did the first episode of the podcast, where I was just sort of stumbling over stuff, umming and ahhing all the time, and sort of like, whereas now I could invite someone on the day before and do the episode the next day. Whereas if I'd done that at the start, I'd be like, no, you can't do that. That's just like don't like, but now I'm like, even someone could phone me up in the morning and say, I'm available this afternoon. I'll be like, yeah, go for it. Let's do it. Let's get on.
I love that thing. And I learned early on in my career that just to be myself. And I said to myself, I remember saying this to myself, like, if people don't like me, that's their problem, not mine. If they don't want to deal with me, that's their problem, not mine. And you and I'm a big, I love Rachel Murphy, and I know you know her very well as well, but she doesn't give a shit.
No, she doesn't.
And I love that about her.
Yeah.
I love that about her. I mean, and okay, you could say she is successful in life, but she's open, and I like that openness, and I emulate that. I might not swear as often as she does, but but I love the fact she just doesn't give a shit, and she'll say it as it is, and that creates trust. Think about it, creates trust.
It totally does, and I try and be, and look, people that know me, and from our clients to the audience to sort of like the whole network, I try and be as transparent and as open and honest as possible, because there's no other way, Julian, for me. I'm afraid. I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I'm sort of like, I always have. I think it maybe people say it's the nursing, in you, with my background, etc. But it's who I am. So I'm not going to change who I am, but for anybody, and that's how sort of like it is moving forward. But so what's the future, Julian, for sort of like in sales and marketing? We've spoken about how it's sort of changed in relation to sort of like over the years. We seem to be potentially losing some of that face-to-face sort of like, and we're advising the audience not to lose that. But unfortunately, in the world of social media, I don't think that's just in sales and marketing. I think that's just in general. We don't speak to each other as much as we used to, whether that's within your personal like networks or within your business networks. It's the way of the world now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And if you put it from the buyer perspective, companies are looking to reduce costs, be more efficient and effective in everything they do. So if they can use AI and technology to streamline that buying process, so you send in a tender and they'll pass it through an AI engine to review, and they're looking for keywords. And it's the same happening in so many different industries. The recruitment industry, you send a CV, and not many of them even get seen by human eyes. They're just reviewing for keywords, and that's not going to change. That's not going to change. And if you look at large organisations, just take the NHS. I have no idea how many thousands, tens of thousands of suppliers they have. Can you imagine working as a buyer in that organisation? And you've got to use technology to become more streamlined. You've got no choice. And if you imagine that every vendor has a salesperson, has a customer success person, probably has a legal and a procurement. So there's multiple people on both sides. So where is it going? I think AI is here to stay, clearly. And I think it's like a pendulum. I think we're going like this. We're using it a lot. I think it will swing back a little. It's my hope anyway. We're already seeing signs that buyers want more of that face-to-face. I think that's still happening, even if it's just face-to-face in a virtual meeting like you and I now. But seeing real people, that won't be long until I'm an AI avatar and you're talking to my avatar, and that can be done already.
I know.
I could make myself look like Tom Cruise or somebody, and buy from me. I mean, there's companies doing that already. It's amazing. So, I think if you focus on the key things that drive companies, for me, it's about having a laser focus on business impact. How can I help this company? What's the business impact? It's using data to help me with my decisions, and that's where AI comes in. And it's about being more efficient, and again, using data and AI to become more efficient. And I think if you're using it sensibly, you can, companies are making great strides forward using it in the right way. The difficulty is when you start hiring people at a lower salary with little experience, who are using it 100% as the gospel truth. And that's, you've got to have somebody that has the experience and knowledge to oversee that information and to apply a common sense eye to it.
Yeah, you've got to have that balance, haven't you? Otherwise, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
Julian, it's been absolutely fantastic having you on this episode of The Only Way is Ethics. I think there's a lot of food for thought out there that we've discussed for people to sort of get into. Thank you ever so much for joining us. Now, one thing we do at the end of each episode is just put you on the spot, if there is, from everything that we've discussed, if there's one thing for the audience to take away, what would that be?
If you're in an organization where you are actually in front of customers, you are in sales. Okay, you're in sales. Fake it till you make it, and have the confidence to speak up and be proud of what you're selling and marketing. Don't hold back. Don't play it down. Actually say this is what the benefits are. And be open, like we said before, being open, being honest, showing integrity is key. And people do still buy people, but it's about having that confidence and not being afraid to ask that. One more thing.
One more
question.
That's absolutely fantastic, Julian, and it's nice to finish on that positive note. Thank you ever so much. Thank you ever so much to our audience for listening. And obviously, just a reminder to everyone, you can find us on Spotify and YouTube, and we look forward to the next episode. Thank you ever so much, Julian.
Thank you, Dean. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.